Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast, Tuesday edition. I'm Michael Bruntz. That's Brian Christopherson. And we got a lot to run through today, Brian, but I want to hit you with a very important question that I've been pondering this morning after Matt Rhule tweeted some workout footage from Nebraska's team commitment week. That's where we are on the calendar, I think. Is that right?
Yep, that's I just marked it in on my calendar today.
Okay, I didn't get the alert on mine, so I'm still behind. How far could you carry Teddy Prohaska if he just jumped on your back right now? It's like carrying a baby giraffe, right? Just kind of throwing him over your shoulder.
Yeah, that'd be. It would depend if Teddy wanted to let me live or not, basically. Like if he wanted to get up quickly after he crushed me, or if he didn't want to have mercy, maybe he didn't like a couple things we wrote, or something like that last year. We thought we were a little too hard on the O-line. They were inconsistent though, weren't they? I mean, but anyway, it would be up to Teddy to decide my fate in that situation.
6'10", 320 pounds worth of offensive tackle on your back. Could you get 20 yards with him?
No. I couldn't get a yard. I mean, I could get like 2 yards because you just fall down. But
yeah, you fall forward. I mean, you're a veteran, crafty veteran in that way.
We've obviously been doing it a while, so you're used to holding the mics up to like a 6'7" or 6'8" lineman or whatnot.
Yep.
And then basketball, of course, you got guys that are 6'10" and in that 7-foot realm. But there's something about Teddy because of just the sheer, mass of like his weight, and then that 6'10". I was actually thinking about that the other day because I forgot he was 6'10". I was thinking he was like one of those 6'7" guys, and I was like, man, he's just a giant, but he was tied for the most points in their system they had with Chief Borders. So maybe Teddy earned points by being willing to be the guy who was carried and also to not crush guys. And maybe they gave him something for that, for being a good teammate.
Not being completely dead weight. So we can get, that's a perfect segue into kind of where Nebraska is on the calendar. We heard from Matt Rhule yesterday. Matt Rhule, Thomas Fidone, Chief Borders, and the kind of topic of it was a pre-spring, I guess. We're less than 2 weeks away from the start of spring ball, but kind of the wrap up of the competition week and time during winter conditioning. What were kind of your takeaways of the way that this staff has kind of structured winter conditioning? Because it seems like it's been much more than just lifting weights and trying to improve your 40.
It's about accountability, it seems like, more than anything. He said early on you could have those clicks where guys like, stick to their position groups or their best buddy, but maybe their best buddy's late. Maybe their best buddy can't run that fast or as fast as other guys or as strong as other guys. And so you needed to like surround yourself, if you wanted to impress in this competition in front of new coaches, with different people maybe and get outside your comfort zone. So I think as I listened to how the format was set up, I thought that's a good idea for taking a sledgehammer to clicks, or like position group, sort of like we're at this table because we're the wide receivers and the D linemen are over here. Like it cuts through that, I think, pretty effectively, and also puts a value on just like the detailed stuff. Because the line that kind of stuck out to me is he said these guys are really competitive. That's obvious. He thinks they're a fast team, but he did mention like the details. Got to get the details, like kind of iron out those wrinkles. And I think that goes to like even little stuff like, being on time, being where you're supposed to be, being available, being someone the person you're right can trust. And I believe that's what the last, 6-7 weeks were about as much as anything. And probably the juiciest tidbit, which will have everyone guessing, he said it, was that there was a starter who was like the last guy picked for when they got to this starter from last year who was Mr. Irrelevant in their like draft process of picking the teams. And that's pretty interesting. So, I mean, he does like, he's very good at articulating his vision up there, but he also will throw out a little meat one, or like here you go, like think about that for a second. Who is that? And is that's the way it's going to be around here? And I think it has to keep his players on edge a little bit too, and guessing, which is a good thing.
Yeah, he also, what do you say? A couple of captains of the teams had to be replaced because they weren't maybe holding up their end of the bargain with things. And it's when you kind of think about it, I think it's pretty smart to do something like, I mean, they do this anyways. This is, they've done it multiple stops at Baylor, Temple, but you've got so many new people coming into the program. You've got coaches trying to learn who guys are. You've got young guys in your program who were way down on the depth chart and trying to make an impression. It seems like just that kind of like culture of competition in some ways. There's a little bit there for everybody in the program, really. I mean, and even the guys that, are wearing the black jerseys for doing mat drills well and things like that. That they need to prove to other people and to the coaching staff that, you can't just rest on the fact that you've been a starter under a previous staff. And I don't know. I mean, I would hope, I guess, that as you kind of, as a player and as a high level athlete, you would probably thrive in a situation where there's competition, but it's also like kind of fun too. I mean, you're with your buddies going to, you get points for going to movies and stuff. You go to basketball games, things like that. I mean, it's I don't know. Will it matter? I guess, when you're having to, beat Wisconsin in the fourth quarter in November. I don't know, but it feels like it's kind of getting everybody on the same page in a way that's, not so top down. I mean, I feel like they're kind of meeting the players where they are and appealing to guys' competitiveness a little bit. Yeah.
I also like the connectivity with that he's stressing within the athletic department, like having those guys care about the other teams, like, and how they're doing, and where it's not just like football's this big empire over here and you don't pay any attention to anybody else. Like I think he's making a point, like Husker athletics, it's at its best when everyone's sort of in on it together, and I want my guys to be a real part of that. And they've got momentum kind of going right now in that department for the first time in a while. I mean, they've had it here in one sport or two sports at times. But they've been getting some wins, but also there's sort of this just like good vibe idea, at least that I kind of get when you're around there, even with basketball and stuff like that, where you feel like they're people are in it together. And I think you got to give Rhule credit for really embracing that, like, as the head football coach, he's the biggest deal here. I mean, he is. And when he's telling his guys, like, let's go to this tennis match, and there's 25, 30 guys there. I mean, I think that's all useful stuff. I also think getting out in the community and fostering, like, you're in it with these fans and they care so much about you. And, we've seen even some good teams from another era where it was sort of an us against them. You'd have that. I don't think I'm taking any leap to say that.
No, definitely not.
And fans felt it, really. Like, it was enough that fans understood that there was a little bit of a us versus them. And some of those teams kind of fed off that. Like, the fans were almost against them because they're tough critiques when they lose and stuff. So I like right away fostering, kind of getting away from that, with what you're doing now. Now it's the off season. Everyone's feeling pretty good about things, but it's a good start, I think, toward, again, taking an axe and, chopping that down, that idea of, like, we're here, they can't understand us on the outside. Instead, there's been a lot of transparency, even like he mentioned it, like, someone asked about roster movement, if anybody had moved, he'd be like, well, if they have, it's on the website. And so, like, I mean, he's right now they're letting everybody kind of look through the window, I think, pretty well. It'll be interesting to see how that goes through practices and what all they do with that.
Other things from Matt Rhule yesterday, Casey Thompson going to be extremely limited during spring. That's not, really a surprise there. I think they're going to be really careful with him. I mean, Rhule talked multiple times about not wanting guys to, get re-injured. They're going to be really careful from that point of view. The two players that were up there, I guess, is there anything else from Rhule that is worth mentioning? Those are kind of the highlights. Was the winter stuff.
I mean, yeah, you got to most of it. It'll all be on our site. There's a lot there. Like, I mean, the practice stuff, the way he's like, I'm a defender of practice, I think is the way he put it. And he wants recruits to see him how they practice. Like, I think that to me shows there's a lot of pride in how we do it. And also he said, I'm not changing how I practice for anybody. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, what recruit stars you have or any of that. Terrence Knighton's not changing his practice style and coaching ways for anybody. So that was interesting how I think they do want to get recruits, which they'll of course have the opportunity to do, like right there and see, this is how we operate, take it or leave it, but this is it. And it shows a lot of belief in the way you do things and structure things, that you want that. So that part. And then I think we can hit on this quick, but Tony White and the defensive staff, they've got a challenge because they're trying to figure each other out right now. And so I do think that's going to be, it always is in the spring, but especially this year, it's going to be a very evolving thing where it's like they're still learning the language of each other as they're teaching it to the players. So that's always a test. And then you have to figure out, like, are some of these guys who are maybe hybrid type players, where do they fit best? He mentioned, I have a ton of defensive backs. There's just like a ton of defensive backs. So what do you do with all those guys? I mean, I sometimes will think about like guys, it's like, oh yeah, that guy's on the roster and we were pretty excited about him, like a Jaleel Martin or like a, Kobe Bretz as a recruit or somebody like that. And so there are a ton of guys where you got to figure out their tiers or figure out, could some of those guys be a second level player on the defense? So he touched on Tony White, though, being very humble and open, to the other coaches as they go through that process. So those are some things that kind of caught my ear.
That group, the defensive group, is interesting because it's kind of split between what you would kind of term Rhule guys. Tony White is obviously not in that circle. And then Tony White has a pair of staffers that he brought from Syracuse as quality control guys who, are within the 3-3-5 world, and how those two groups mesh will be interesting to follow. And Matt Rhule said that he's kind of stayed out of it for the most part, and he's kind of listened. And he's like former linebacker. He said that he's going to be very involved with the defensive line, offensive line too, certainly. But just kind of waiting to see how everything pieces itself together over these next couple months before he really kind of starts swinging his weight around. And your point is about kind of what Rhule said about defensive backs, I think is an important one, because in previous meetings with the media, I think he referred to their ability to mix and match positions with guys and maybe try guys at different spots, as I think he called it like the magic or something like that with their staff. And in my mind, at least, there's a lot more potential movement with guys on the defensive side of the ball than there is on offense. And even, maybe a guy on defense helps you, somewhere on offense. But it just seems like there's such a glut of guys on that defensive back depth chart. The linebacker piece of it, you got to find some depth there, but they've got a lot of options. I would kind of look at those two spots as potential movement places for guys this spring.
Yeah, you always wonder if DBs of a certain frame can be could be a backer or, or whatever you want to call them. I sometimes just say the second level, like move up one step. And there are probably a few guys capable of that. And that's where, this staff, I don't really want to guess at who they are. You kind of want to get into the spring a little bit and fill that out and ask some coaches, like, is there some guys you can move around or where are they going, and see how open they are to talking about that as it's happening and it's fluid. But that's definitely going to be one of the storylines of spring. Like, cause I do feel like there's going to be like a couple guys that are notable moves at some point, there has to be, cause there's just so many parts they're looking at for the first time, and they've done it so much in their past. That's why I feel confident saying that, because it's in their resume of moving guys and having success with it. So, like even Chief Borders, we can get into that. I mean, he was up front and he's got a big frame, like impressive guy, standing in front of you, 6'4", 240. But he views himself as a flexible guy that can bounce around a lot, I think, in the 3-3-5 defense. Really like just like he's a happy dude, you can tell that, like even when he's up there, just like every comment he's sort of smiling and just has a upbeat way about him. And so that's encouraging to see a guy like him, one of those transfers, who obviously has fit in very well. He's really embraced being a Husker and doing community stuff. But also from a football perspective, if he's pretty good, they need depth there right now. You got Reimer and Henrich, but Henrich is coming back from an injury still. And you would like a couple guys built like Chief Borders there in the middle of your defense if you can find them. So I was impressed by him yesterday, and just sort of his first handling of like the Nebraska media and kind of being out front.
Yeah. What did you make of Thomas Fidone? Because that's, I mean, obviously the stuff about getting yelled at and, wanting coaches last year, wanting him to play, even though he hadn't been cleared, that will get the bulk of the headlines there. But what do you think his role can be? And I mean, he didn't sound at all to me like a guy that has had two pretty tough years at Nebraska since he arrived. I mean, we've seen him play a handful of snaps against Wisconsin a couple of years ago, but beyond that, it's been just setback after setback for him. But what did you make of his session yesterday, and kind of where things stand for him going into the spring?
Yeah, he reminds me of the guy who was a recruit. I mean, just the way it's like, this is my mission. I expect to be over here by the end of it. And the timing of it has changed, but that's where I'm going to end up. And you can believe it or not, but that's going to happen. So he's always had that sort of way about him, which you need as an athlete. I remember when he first got here, a couple of the older tight ends said he had to be humbled a little bit. Like, it is a different level. And I think that happens sometimes. But I like how he talked through he was the captain of the mini 12-person team that won the competition they were doing. And they were last place the first week, he said. And so they announced it like last place Fidone. And he was like, that ain't happening anymore, And so he got on his guys, and he sort of became a good leader in the sense of like, this is how we're going to attack it and get points and all this stuff, the way it's set up. And this doesn't mean they were like the best workout guys, and Rhule said that, like Borders and Fidone, because they were up there, didn't mean they were like the best at the workouts. They just were good at the system that was in place and how they did it. And but I think that showed some leadership qualities and sort of his makeup of like ultra competitiveness. Like even in this, like we're not going to be last again, and in fact, we're going to win this competition by a mile. He also said that he's gotten better at not letting one mistake like just weigh on his mind where it drags him down. He said that has happened before because he's such a perfectionist in like the football part of it. And he's worked on that so that if you have a bad play, you move on from it. And it doesn't mean, you don't have to dwell on some things as much. So Yeah, and there was the part about last year and what you do with him. I mean, I don't have enough context on that because it was sort of in a passing. There were a couple comments or questions asked about it. I just don't know enough to have a big opinion on it. But um, I think the important thing is that he's healthy now. Rule wants to be a little cautious with him this spring still, and I think that's smart. And that also, I think they were smart to not play him last year. That
Yeah.
season, like that to me is the most important thing. Like, get that guy fully healthy to where he is at right now, where he feels like I can go ball now and be who I am, as opposed to last year where you're trying to force it in November. Like if there was any doubt, even 5% doubt last year at given his injury history, I think from the outside looking in, I'm totally fine with what happened as far as not playing him.
Felt like, I mean, even the first time around when he kind of went through it with the knee and came back, late in that season, it felt quick to me.
I thought so, yeah.
And
But
just kind of like a similar situation of like, okay, let's do kind of a cost benefit analysis here of like what are we really doing or gaining by getting him in a handful of snaps. And I think caution is probably the best approach with him. I think that's going to kind of be where Rhule and his staff go anyways. He's talked so much about having guys available being the top priority for them. So, but that tight end group, when we talked about it, is such an interesting group between him and Gilbert and um, I'm trying to remember even who they have coming back in that group, like
Borkercher, yeah. Nate Borkercher.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of playing time to be gained there, and we'll see it. We'll see if both Gilbert and Fidone are ready to step in there, because it's the Satterfield at South Carolina did use tight ends in pretty unique ways, and it seems like that group at least has kind of different pieces that they can kind of put in that puzzle to create some mismatches. So it's going to be an interesting one to follow, and certainly if he's healthy, I think that's a position group that's trending up there.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's the young guys. You got your Rollins, your James Carney, Chase Androff was there last year. We'll see what happens there with him. He's got a big body, but yeah, and I think it's really interesting that just Bob Wager's coaching them and has that head coach experience and how that translates. And to me, I like it. I mean, I think that's a guy who's had to balance a lot of things as a head coach. I always feel like if you've been a head coach at a big time Texas school, you're probably pretty equipped to handle a room pretty well. So, yeah, it'll be interesting how it plays out. But the confidence of Thomas Fidone stuck out. It hasn't wavered. It doesn't seem like. He mentioned that he briefly thought like, yeah, what should I do next year? As far as the school, but it seemed like it was kind of a fleeting thought. And once his staff got here, he dove in, and it's a good sign when he's one of the two guys that's picked up to go up front, by the head coach. That's probably the most encouraging thing, more than anything that was said, is Matt Rhule thinks he should be up there talking to us.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else from yesterday, or do we move on to the story of the week, which is of course Nebraska basketball?
We can, we can move on. We'll have plenty more on the old site from yesterday throughout the week, of course, and we're doing a California focus and recruiting, so we'll have that too, which is ongoing. There's a fresh story up there with Tony White talking about recruiting California, so all that's on the site. But yeah, let's talk some hoops.
You were at Carver Hawkeye Arena, and it's Nebraska basketball sweeps Iowa for the first time in the Big Ten era. A game that, if you did the Fred Hoiberg, you got the glasses off and really kind of got the cheaters on and looked down at the paper, that was probably not a game that Nebraska should have been in, given everything that second chance points, offensive rebounds. Nebraska shot well, but it just never felt like Nebraska was going to pull away in that thing, and then you look up at the end and they win by 4. What was kind of your vantage point of everything and the way it played out?
Yeah, Fred looked at the stat sheet and he needed his glasses, said his eyes were going bad and was still having trouble reading it. And I think it might have been just because he didn't believe that you can walk into the Lions den and get beat 33-11, I think it was, on second chance points, give up 21 offensive boards. I don't think they would take any offense to this because Hoiberg was sort of humorous about it himself afterward, which you can do when you win a game like that. But for a bit, it felt like you were watching like the sixth graders versus like the third graders when it came to the board work. It was just like, oh, here you go, like throw it up, miss it. The guy grabs it over a Husker, throws it back out, take another shot. The thing is, Iowa only shot like 37%, something like that. While Nebraska shot 58%. So this offense in this new look roster, they got it figured out a bit. And I think Hoiberg has always been thought of as a pretty good offensive mind, but he's really figured out how to cause problems for opposing defenses with the personnel that he has, which doesn't look like much at first glance. When you kind of look out at Nebraska's team, you're like, oh boy. And, but everybody just keeps maximizing. And what was amazing, Bruntz, was Tominaga did not score in the second half. Sam Griesel played very well, but he actually only had 2 points in the second half. Walker had 7 in the second half, but did not finish in double digits, although he probably has a bunch of scratches on his arm from getting hammered going to the basket. He was like ticked off like 4 or 5 times. He didn't get a call. So he wasn't in double digits. And what I said with the other guys didn't happen in the second half. So they won that game despite all that, with like Jamarcus Lawrence hitting 3 threes, Sam Hoiberg going off for 9 points in the second half.
Wilcher made some shots down the stretch.
Wilcher was good. Wilcher had 7 in a row when it was tied at 73, including the one, which was funny. When he made it, it was no one covered him. He knocked it down, made a 5-point game with 2.5 minutes. That was the first time that arena was like, oh, crap. Like, I mean, they were nervous a little bit as it was building, but it was suddenly like, this could actually go the other way, And Iowa played panic, too, the last 2.5 minutes on offense. They played like a team that felt like the way to the gym, sort of, after that 3-point shot, I thought. And then Wilhelm hit the side of the backboard on one where I was like, oh, man, I just like kind of covered my face. And he came back and he hasn't hit a lot of threes, but he hit one when it was 64-60 Iowa that cut it to 1. And I thought it was the biggest shot of the game because I thought it was that point where either the Hawkeyes were going to put a gap here and win by 10, or Nebraska was going to put the heat on them in their own gym. Like, hey, you're in danger of getting swept by Nebraska here, who you thought you owned before this year. So yeah, they were a pretty depressed fan base after that game because, Nebraska took them in football and they took them in basketball there now. And obviously they've got women's basketball rolling at Iowa and need to unseat them in wrestling. And then you'll really have those guys rattled.
Penn State's already in their head. If Nebraska jumps them too, it's curtains over there. Jamarcus Lawrence he was good, like really good in that game. And the funny thing was too, though, like in addition to the turnover or the rebound disparity, like Nebraska had some really, really just dumb turnovers in that game, just lazy passes. I know Hoiberg had one, Lawrence had a couple where you're just like what's going on here? And Iowa just wasn't able to take advantage of it. But I've been most impressed, I think, like the potential of what Lawrence can be, I think, going forward, just based on the way he's played on the back half of this season. Like he's stepped up, hit some big shots, and looked really confident in doing it.
Yeah, he has had 15 points the last 2 games, which are tying career highs, both of them. And it's the way he just elevates without any fear right now on the offensive end. Like early in the year, you could tell he was one of the newer guys on the court. So it's sort of like, should I shoot it? You pass up and you're not there yet. And I know he's worked hard behind the scenes and really on his at the defensive end too. He's become a pretty good defender if people pay attention. And he can be, I think, a pretty good on the ball defender as they go forward. So he's got great value. And yes, he's he's probably the most encouraging individual thing to me, because we don't know what's going to happen with Casey, obviously. But Jamarcus, you're pretty confident. I always say pretty confident because you know what era we're living in. But I'm not worried about it. I'm just saying, where we're at and with the portal and stuff like that. But he's just like a guy you expect to be around for a while. And in December, I wouldn't have thought we'd be so confident in him, believing like this guy is like for next year or two going to be pretty sturdy, and I think has the attention of other people in the Big Ten now too. So it's been quite a climb, and it gives you an encouraging key piece as you sort of like have to fill in now with. They're going to have to do some offseason work, obviously, to replace like Walker and Grissel and Emmanuel, but he's a good start. So yeah, it's exciting, and now you got to make a little run in Chicago. That'd be fun.
So if you're paying attention to your NIT bracketology this morning, some NIT bracketologists, and there's not many, but Nebraska potentially hosting Villanova as a 4 seed in one of the brackets if things break well. You're going to Chicago, I believe. Is that a go? It's still in the air.
I have a rental car book, so yeah.
How many suits you taking?
I'm taking 5 suits. This is different. It was Jordan. You're making a Michael Jordan, I believe, 98 reference, and I think we're both Team Jordan, aren't we? I don't want to like turn off the Team LeBron guys here, but yeah, it's our era.
Yep.
It's kind of funny by the way, like your era is the guy who, Jordan's like 20 years older than us, but that your era is the guy who's actually like 20 years older that was rolling when you were 9.
Yep.
And Jordan, before the 98 finals, things were looking kind of tough in that series. And he said, I only took 1 suit, on that trip. And so I'm taking 5 suits.
You mix and match
to Chicago. Okay, I'm taking 2 suits with different shirt combinations, and
there you go. Maybe a vest.
Yeah. No, I probably won't wear a suit. I'll probably wear a polo and spill on it. But yeah, I'm gonna go. I think
the sports writer uniform, spilled polo. What? So they got Minnesota again for the 3rd time. I mean, does this team feel like it's got at least like a 2-day run in it? Do you think?
I mean, possibly. I think the conference tournament, especially those 11-14 games, are always kind of anything can happen. Like, obviously, Nebraska is the favorite, but some people say it's hard to beat a team 3 times. So there's some
Fred says no, though, right?
We were talking about something else, NFL related once, and I think he said the data doesn't actually say that. So I don't know what's true on that. Minnesota hasn't given up on their year, though. They beat Rutgers last week, and they were toe-to-toe with Wisconsin in a 4-point game. So I fully expect, like, it's going to be kind of a tense game, And, I mean, like, even last year, Nebraska was feeling pretty good about itself when it went to the Big Ten tournament, and they built up, I think, a double-digit lead on Northwestern. And in that environment, you can have that bad 5 or 6 minutes, and that's it. Like you give up that 13-2 run, and it ends up doing you in. So they just got to really have a response. When if Minnesota gets that little 5 or 6-0 run here, you squash it right in its place. And if you can consistently do that, and then bust off a 12-0 run of your own at some point, I still think Nebraska's got a lot working on offense. It's going to make them a tough out in that tournament. They just got to get past the jitters of the first day, and then you would get Maryland, who they beat in Lincoln, and Maryland has kind of struggled away from their own gym. And I sometimes actually think there's an advantage for the team that won a game that's like used to, they've played in the arena one night for that second game for like a half, so maybe you take advantage of that. We'll see. But I think they could win a couple, maybe.
The first night, like the atmosphere is always really weird. Like the arena's kind of half empty. Like you don't have like the built-in buzz really. Like you're kind of having to create your own energy. It almost feels like an early season, neutral site tournament in some ways, where it's, you're playing in like a half empty gym in like South Carolina or the Bahamas or something like that. But I think your point's correct. I mean, like the one thing that Nebraska has is they feel like they're a little bit of a streakier shooting team too, where it's like if Casey gets on one or something like that, that's kind of a wave I think that they can ride a little bit, or they get somebody else kind of clicking, something like that. But do you like, what do you think they have to do in Chicago to like ensure that there's basketball on the other side of the Big Ten tournament for them? Win one, like two, you feel really great.
Two, I mean, if they win two, there should be no doubt to me they're in.
Yeah,
NIT. I could make an argument they should be in. Like, I mean, they're a good team. They're like an NIT team, and if I know there's all these metrics and the NET does not like Nebraska much. I don't like the NET much.
Ooh.
Just not because of Nebraska's standing, but I just think it's got stupid quirks to it where, like, if people actually think about it, we now have a system they're using, which they promote like in every game that's on TV, where like if it's a 12-point game with a minute left, maybe you shouldn't put in your reserves if you're losing, because maybe you can get that to a 9-point loss, as opposed to a 15-point loss, which plays worse in the computer and all that stuff. And I understand over the totality of a season, those numbers are supposed to mean something about who's a tougher squad. But Nebraska right now is a tough squad. Like, ask Iowa, ask Maryland, ask Rutgers. And they have 4 quad 1 wins. They have a bunch of quad 1 losses, but that also tells you, like, this is even if they lost to Minnesota, that would be their first loss against a team that's not in the quad 2. So if they beat Minnesota, they will have a resume that doesn't have what you would call really a bad loss on it. It's all like quality teams that they've lost to so far. And I just think that should count for something. I mean, Nebraska played a tough schedule and they are playing well at the end of the year. And I know maybe you're not supposed to factor this in, but yes, if they played at PBA, it would probably be the best NIT environment of the whole tournament. I'd say that pretty strongly. So, yeah, I think they should be in, but you need one, I think, to kind of not give you that bad loss on the resume and feel a little bit better. And then 2, if they didn't get in, I'd be stunned.
Yeah. What would be their worst loss? It was like St. John's. Like, is that
something like
on
that?
The road.
But I don't have the numbers right in front of me right now. They're 4-10, I think, quad 1. I could pull it up, but
Oklahoma, maybe, like,
yeah, that's a quad 2 loss. And then their quad 3s and 4s, they're 9-0 or something if you combine them, or better than that. They haven't lost to those teams. Minnesota is in that lower quadrant, so they would give Nebraska that type of loss if the Huskers lost this game, but it would be their first, and a lot of teams have one of those. So I don't know. If we're looking at the whole picture, I don't know that this one game against Minnesota should define everything for this team that I feel like is sort of has proven itself. But I think they need to go into that game thinking it's everything, like you keep doing that and just make it so they can't keep you out. That's what you're trying to do this time of year.
So everything comes down to a third matchup against lowly Minnesota. That's where it's in a half-empty gym in Chicago.
Yes.
As it should be.
Feeling like an 8 a.m. Saturday game probably, or whatever, like at the Y with the crowd the way it is.
Some noon ball. Let's wrap up with some Nebraska baseball. They, of course, home opener today in Lincoln. The real field temperature, it's cloudy and 36. that means Northern Colorado's coming to town, and they may not play. So we'll see if they can get that in. But coming off of a 3-game stay up at the Vikings Stadium up in the Twin Cities, finished the weekend 2-1. Upset number 7 Vanderbilt on Friday, 5-3. Took care of business against Hawaii on Saturday, and then ran into the Ole Miss buzzsaw on Sunday, and gave up an 8 spot in the bottom of the first, and that was all she wrote. So I think overall I would take that as a good weekend, though. We'll see what Vanderbilt is this season. I don't know that they're necessarily the lighter rocker Vanderbilt of the past few years, but that was a big win, and they beat a really good arm for Holton from Vanderbilt in that first game. And just a couple takeaways from the series. Nebraska's continued to hit. They're hitting over 3. I think they're hitting 316 as a team coming into the midweeks, and just up and down the lineup, they're just really tough on opposing pitchers. They in the past have struggled to hit lefties, not so this year. They can mix and match. A lot of offensive depth there. The thing for me that they've got to get figured out, you like what you have in Emmett Olson and Jace Kaminska in those first 2 weekend starter roles on Friday and Saturday. Got to get Sunday figured out. Caleb Clark is struggling quite a bit. So we'll see if there's a change made there. And then just bullpen roles. I think they like what they have from kind of their veteran top line guys like Garza. Shea Shannon was great on Friday against Vanderbilt. But the further they get into weekend series, and I think a lot of teams are like this, but certainly Nebraska, your confidence level and who's running down that line into the game is a little bit less. So that's kind of what needs to get figured out over this 10-game homestand that they're starting. They don't play another game out of the state of Nebraska until April 1st. So an opportunity to run up some wins here and kind of get their house in order a little bit in that pitching staff before conference play starts.
Yeah, I mean, just from a more distant view than you have of it, I would have never guessed they were going to have a winning series this last weekend. So, I mean, to me, it was like a major accomplishment. And you could probably speak to it better of like how much value. I mean, obviously you don't know exactly what Vanderbilt's going to be like, as you said, but how much value that has on your resume when it comes to later, and why you schedule those type of games, because the losses don't ding you that much, right? But you get a couple of those, and man, it's everything.
Yeah, no, those types of games, the neutral site wins over good opponents, or you go on the road and kind of handle your business against a good opponent early in the season. Those wins really travel with you when it gets time to NCAA tournament time. And Will Bolt wants to host regionals. That's his goal. And in order to do that, you have to schedule tough early in the season, and you have to win. And that's the value of beating a team like Vanderbilt. Is it's their RPI is going to be good. It's going to be looked at as a quality win no matter what. That's why that San Diego series, that was a good opportunity for Nebraska, and I think they're going to be a good team. But those are the games that you have to win to help you later in the season. So I kind of looking at what the Big Ten is this year. Maryland, I think, is still going to be well thought of. I don't know that there's a ton of other, potentially top 25 teams sitting out there in the conference right now. I think it's, going to be some good teams, some NCAA tournament type teams, maybe not a top 25 team. So not a chance to, really stack a ton of great wins. So that's why that win over Vanderbilt was really important.
This is old news, but the second weekend where they swept South Alabama, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That was huge to me, that not just that they won the series, but that they swept it and that they got it right back to 500 and sort of, because I've seen a couple Husker baseball seasons recently where they've had that tough start and you're kind of trying to get up that hill to get to 5. You know how that number is in baseball, to get to 500 or above. And then you're like, okay, let's go.
Yeah.
And so to immediately erase that the bad feeling of the first weekend. I think if they have success this year, you got to go back to that series and say that was monumental to like right away, like punch back the way they did.
Yeah, no, I mean, you never want to be in a situation as a Northern team where you're in a huge hole, in terms of just win-loss record and for confidence too. I mean, I think this team felt like they were much better than what they represented in San Diego, and to be able to, go out and really dominate South Alabama that whole weekend was really big, I think, just confidence-wise. And, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, they had a really tough season last year. And I think in order to kind of wipe that and really, mentally turn the page to this season, you needed to have some success early on. So I'm with you. I mean, that was a huge series, maybe not from a national perception point of view, but just, feeling really good going back to Lincoln after winning those 3 games down in Alabama.
Yep. Well, it's good to, man, I felt really good seeing that win over Vanderbilt. It just was like, I did. Like I was in Omaha and I didn't track it, wasn't tracking it until I saw the final result from you. And I was like, all right, like they got something going early and now they can really use that. So I think it definitely bumped the optimism around here about things, and that's good.
Yeah. And so again, 10 game homestand. Don't play another game out of the state until April 1st. So you're kind of through that first section of the season where you try to win what you can. Now you're in the we got to take care of business against teams that you should take care of business against. With Northern Colorado, Illinois State, you get an Omaha matchup in there as well, and I think I want to say Nichols State, the founded by Dr. Charles Nichols. I think that's the next. I got them for 4, maybe.
My friend Richard Kimball is not well.
Yeah, he sold all that Provasic and started the university. Yeah. So yeah. Anyways, they're in that portion in the schedule where it's probably going to be a lot of cold and uncomfortable games at Haymarket Park. A lot of you might see a few Johnny Allstaff games. It's just Nichols, no longer Nichols State, but they follow up Omaha and Illinois State. So yeah, just
Nichols,
just Charles Nichols.
Huh. Final question: would Nebraska and Northern Colorado cancel a game if it was over 65 degrees? It'd be like too hot.
What is this? All I brought was turtlenecks and you got rubbing Vaseline on the ears to fight the frostbite. Yeah, I think they might get today, and we'll see. But former Nebraska head coach Mike Anderson now coaching Northern Colorado, so I believe that means almost the entire coaching staff from the 2005 College World Series team will be in Haymarket Park today, with the exception of Andy Sawyers, who is the hitting coach. So there's a little trivia for you.
Yeah. Well, we'll have all the coverage if there is from that and Chicago, and we got tons of recruiting stuff still coming this week and stuff from Rhule and the players yesterday. So there's nothing that is lacking there. People should come to the site, I think.
Yeah. It's going to be a big couple of weeks of recruiting as they get rolling with spring ball. Matt Rhule wants the recruits to see some practice, so they're going to be coming in and out of Lincoln. We'll have that coverage. Going to start previewing the spring. I think just hey, this guy's still on the roster. This guy's at this position, to get you primed up for spring ball too. So we'll have all of that at Husker247. Get to the site. We'll have another podcast later this week, talking California recruiting with Greg Biggins and whatever else pops up in the next few days as well. So thanks for listening.